And we're with Matt Stevens, the Community Outreach Specialist of SMART train system, the SMART Sonoma-Marin area
Rail transit.
Rail transit, not rapid transit.
Nope.
Not BART, but SMART.
We're a fast train, though. You know, we're not going to be as fast as the high-speed rail project in California.
Right.
But our top speed is 79 miles an hour. Trains go faster, actually, but the Federal Road Administration limits our speeds to 79.
That's faster than traffic, you know, during commute. So
Absolutely.
That's great. You have a very impressive and wide-ranging set of experiences represented in your resume, in your personal artistic pursuits, and all that. What drew you into this kind of world of working with organizations and helping them work out their kinks and bugs and bringing cognitive behavioral therapy notions to the fore to make them function? How does one work into that, especially being such a hot bass player?
You know, I attribute it to a series of lucky accidents.
Okay, yeah.
You know, I moved to California to become. My dream was to be a rock star, right?
Well, that's always the dream, right? Where did you come from?
Northern Idaho, actually.
Okay. Oh, right on.
And there's not much rock music in Idaho.
There's never been an Idaho scene.
Well, I did play in bars when I was in high school.
Oh, cool.
In Idaho, you could drink at 19.
That was my next question. I'm like, what are you doing? That's great.
But I moved to California, the Bay Area, to pursue music. And
where does that put us in the timeline of your life?
That would have been in 79, 80. Okay. I would have been in mid-20s at that time.
God, so was it like a punk band? What were you? I mean,
ska music.
Oh, there we go.
Punk
of course.
And ska.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that would be right in that amazing emergent point of all of that.
Yeah, it's great music. And but I had my future wife with me, and it became clear after a couple of years that I should probably learn a new trade.
Right.
I was beginning to realize that rock stardom, A, wasn't really in my cards, and B, I was falling out of love with the idea.
Yeah.
And it's a hard lifestyle, and I love family, I love my kids, I have grown kids, and I love community, actually.
Yeah, and you would have none of that if you stayed a rock star.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
So I ended up at Sonoma State.
Yeah.
And Sonoma State, I started going to Sonoma State in '81.
Okay.
And one of the things that I have an affinity for is wilderness and natural places. And so they had a program back then called Wilderness Psychology.
Of course they did, because it's Sonoma State, Granola U back in the day,
right?
And
so I studied, got my bachelor's in wilderness psychology, and my plan was to get a master's degree in counseling psychology and become a marriage and family therapist.
Okay, so this is not to untowardly challenge you, but wilderness therapy, psychology, what is that exactly?
Well, we open that door, and I'll see if I can do a 30-second version.
Yeah.
Our brains and our societies, and I will say a family is a society as well, evolved for the most part in a natural setting with natural cycles. We, as an animal, obtain food and our sustenance from nature. And so our brains actually are designed to function in an optimal way in natural systems. And natural systems have very different dynamics than the kinds of systems we find ourselves in today.
Right.
One really simplistic example is things in nature happen in cycles. Nothing is wasted, everything's recycled. In modern industrial society, things are very linear. There's no recycling.
Right.
There is now, but
I know what you mean, though. Yeah, things go from here to there.
So one of the things that I think that we as an animal experience, especially in industrialized society, is a kind of neurotic angst. Because our brains don't feel at home where we actually find ourselves to be.
And that was the name of your ska band, Neurotic Angst.
Actually, the ska band was Talk is Cheap.
The irony.
Right.
That's great. That is a fascinating framework, and I could see how it has many applications. How do you bring that kind of training to your work now?
Well, I'd done 2 years of counseling psychology work,
Right.
and I had my wife and I had our first child, and I took a year off to
Yeah.
work so she could stay home and be with the baby. And so in that interim time, Sonoma State started an organization development program.
Okay.
And one of the professors in that program knew me and recruited me into the program. So I did a deal with the program that I could do the second year and get my master's in organization development.
That is great.
And
What a
so-
break. Yeah.
Well, the reason I did that is because at that time, two driving forces in psychotherapy. One was managed care, and so long-term depth psychotherapy was not being paid for by insurance companies anymore. And to become a licensed therapist, I would have to do a few thousand hours of indentured servitude.
Yeah.
And being a consultant, the consulting was blowing up. Organizational consulting was blowing up.
Yeah, it was like a new industry at that point.
It was a new industry.
Yeah.
And so I went ahead and got my degree in that, and I went right into consulting after I graduated.
That is really great.
1980.
Yeah.
1990 actually. And so
Did you go right into the sort of corporate atmosphere, or did you run your own consultancy?
You know,
or?
I ended up working with a local Santa Rosa group called the Results Group. Some
Okay.
great people. I met some great people, and actually prior to that, I worked for a company called Global Business Network in Emeryville, and they were a group of former Royal Dutch Shell employees who invented a planning process called scenario planning. And so
Interesting.
I went to work as a consulting assistant to the president of the company, learned the strategic planning business from them. Then I went to work with the Results Group and did really 3 or 4 things. So strategic planning, I did a lot of strategic plans for the state of California,
Yeah.
CalPERS, CalSTRS, Medi-Cal.
And you're part of the city of Sonoma planning, part of strategic planning.
Well, actually, I was on the planning commission in Sebastopol.
Oh, right
That's
on.
one other thing I did for a while.
Oh, cool.
But to tie this into SMART,
Mm-hmm.
the company I work with, the Results Group, we had been doing stakeholder-driven strategic planning and organization development. And what stakeholder-driven means is that you identify all the stakeholders in the system that you're working with in terms of either planning or organization development, and bring them to the table and involve them in the process.
Okay.
Get much better results that way. And so in 2001, the SMART Commission at that point in time was looking ahead and realizing that they were going to eventually put a sales tax measure on the ballot to provide a local funding source for the SMART project. And they realized that they would need an out-of-the-box approach to community engagement to pass a sales tax measure by a 2/3 majority, which is what you have to pass a sales tax measure in California thanks to Prop 13.
So looking all the way back, so I mean, just to give a sense of the long-range thinking that goes into this kind of endeavor, right? We're back almost 20 years, right? and
Gray hairs. I got gray in that time.
and part of your mission at that point was to how do you get people to understand the benefit of SMART,
Right.
SMART Train, and then how they have to contribute via this tax. During a period, if I remember correctly, like taxes were not very popular. I think it was still the Reagan era, right? No, where are we? We're probably in the 90s, right?
I think
yeah.
we're in the Schwarzenegger era now.
Okay. All right. Right. Sorry, I was still thinking ska.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so it's a very weird time to have to, engage the people that way. So
Right.
how about we come back after the break and kind of talk about how you did that, and then how you can help us do it. So we're with Matt Stevens. He's the community outreach specialist for SMART, among other many cool things. We'll be right back. And we're back with Matt Stevens. He's the community outreach specialist for SMART, but he has this resume that is just a panoply of awesome things he's accomplished in the organizational structuring. Give me some words here. What do we?
Organization development.
Yes, that's a good.
Behavior, team building.
And this is, I mean, people forget this kind of stuff that you work in is sort of what governs our lives to a large degree, especially in the workplace. And it's not by accident that things work the way they do. They're often put into place, or hopefully somebody's putting them into place, and you're one of the architects of how things get done in this kind of milieu. So harkening back to SMART and getting that tax passed in the Schwarzenegger era in California, which probably was not a popular endeavor to want to step into, how did you wrap your head around that, and how did you proceed to make it happen?
The first thing that we did was we identified all the various stakeholder groups, thought leaders in the North Bay. This is now we realize it's a two-county system. They're a two-county district now, Marin County and Sonoma County. And at the time, it was thought that a sales tax measure could not be passed in Marin County because of the opposition to the concept of a train. And
Opposition to a train itself, not just the tax, but they don't want a train there?
the train was the big thing, actually.
I'm surprised.
In Marin
Wow.
County. Now, in some ways, that's always been kind of a myth because they came up with over 65% yes vote in Marin County when we put the sales tax measure on the ballot in 2008.
Interesting.
And so there's a tsunami of support for SMART in Marin County. But there is a small, well-developed, I think probably independently wealthy
Cabal of
people
Yeah.
who oppose the train.
Right.
The kinds of things that they would attribute to the train would be growth-inducing.
Okay.
That was probably the main thing. And
So they real NIMBY kind of like not in my backyard thinking.
you know, another show I'll tell you talk about the history of NIMBYism in
There we go.
America, and it starts in Marin County.
I would love to. Let's pick that up some other time. That's a great idea. Yeah.
However, I love Marin County,
Yeah, of course,
and Marin County is full of people who support the SMART train and will benefit from the SMART train.
Yeah.
But what we did in 2000, this would be 2002 now, is we identified all the stakeholders and thought leaders in both counties, and we started a series of what were really focus groups, but we called them town hall meetings.
Okay.
And we probably did 30 of them, 15 in each county, and talked to people about the SMART project, the concept, the potential benefits it could bring to our broader community, their concerns, their issues. We invited opponents as well as proponents. We invited people who were thought leaders but had no voice in kind of the transportation realm. And that was really the first thing we did to begin building awareness of the project in the North Bay.
So that would be phase one: build awareness.
Right.
Right. And open a dialogue. It sounds
Right.
like. Okay.
And how this relates to wilderness therapy, perhaps, is that it's all about relationship, frankly.
Right.
Even today, when you talk about branding, right, you talk about brand affinity, that's really about developing a relationship with, in our case, a ridership, people
Right.
who will use the train. And so what we do is build a relationship and develop and maintain that relationship.
And that relationship with the brand or with the train represents all those things. Your relationship is with something that represents all those things that you feel good about, and your values and your ecology and your notions that revolve around that.
Well, and your commute. I mean, many people in the North Bay have a relationship with their car.
Yeah.
And that may be their primary relationship, frankly. So, you know, one of the things one of the characteristics of the North Bay commute is that in Marin County, if you make less than $250,000 a year, it's difficult to live in a single family home.
Yeah.
I think the median home price in Marin today is approaching $1 million. And so that means if you're a policeman or a fireman or a county worker or a teacher or a Kaiser doctor.
Who works there, you're not living there.
Right, exactly. And so you have that big commute going into Marin County.
Yeah.
And there are choke points. The main one being the Novato Narrows between Petaluma and Novato.
So let me run this by you. I live in Petaluma, and we call it the Novato Narrows, right?
Right.
But they call it the Petaluma Narrows. They're wrong, right? Technically?
I just call it the Narrows.
Yeah, okay. Diplomatic. Nice. Yeah, that really kind of bristled me when I Petaluma Narrows.
It's and
But it's terrible.
Unfortunately, the funding for we've actually done a lot of work to add a third lane in both counties. And both counties, there's agencies called congestion management agencies in each county, and their mission is to do the planning work and bring the money in to fund those transportation projects.
Right.
The Narrows project actually recently has lost a lot of its funding. It had some funding kind of held at the state, and I think that's been removed now. And so I don't know
How narrows-minded of them.
I don't know when we're going to get the Narrows widened, which is bad for commuters. It's good for SMART.
Fair enough. Okay.
Our tracks actually go right along the Narrows, right next to the highway.
You can see it, yeah. So was this part of your evil plan then to drive ridership is by getting the Narrows project canceled?
Actually, I am an advocate and a fan of all transportation projects. I think that we do need 3 lanes all the way in the Narrows. Because not everybody is going to take the train. The train doesn't work for everybody. It will work for a lot of people. but I think we need to have both. And I always think of SMART as a component of a multimodal transportation system, and a component that helps optimize it. I think that
it optimizes all systems.
It does,
by dint
yes.
of its presence.
It helps optimize bus transit, helps optimize automobile transit, and it provides an alternative to people who don't want to drive in congestion.
Right. So I have two smart train questions, burning questions. I asked one of Chris Corsi, a colleague of yours and friend. The wine car, is that real? Is that really going to happen? Is there going to be a wine car on the smart train?
When we created the specifications for our vehicles, and this train in many ways is based on SMART specifications. The manufacturer is the company that makes the bullet train in Japan, and they're the oldest continuously operating train manufacturer in the world.
That's great.
But they didn't have a train in the North American marketplace, and so interestingly enough, they actually won both the price point competition and the technical specification competition for our bidding process.
Oh, wow.
And
that says something, doesn't it? Yeah.
And when we created specifications for the train cars, we included a service bar.
Nice.
So one car has an ADA compliant bathroom.
Yeah.
The other car has a wine country compliant service bar.
Wine country compliant. That's great. That's my ska band.
Right. And now, having said that, the SMART Board of Directors has to make a policy decision as to what will be served in that service bar.
Right.
SMART board members off the record for years have been saying they'd love to sell beer and wine, much like the ferry does.
Yeah, that would be the model. Yeah.
However, until the SMART board makes that decision, that policy decision, I'm reluctant to say that we will be serving wine and beer on the car.
So until Kendall Jackson joins the board.
Yes.
We're not, okay. That's great.
Well, Kendall Jackson's going to have to run for public office first.
Right. Good point. So my other smart question was, why does it stop in Larkspur? Why doesn't it go all the way to the bridge, or under the bridge, or under the bay, like BART?
That's a fair question, and a good question, because you think it would make a lot of sense to connect with San Francisco.
That's the most obvious commute pattern. Yeah.
Well, I'll address that in a moment. But the direct answer to your question is we do have a San Francisco connection, which is at the Larkspur Ferry Terminal.
Of course, right.
And there's no good way to get across the bay there. The geology underneath the bay between the Marin Headlands and San Francisco is not flat. It's actually a steep canyon, and there's a tremendous amount of current going under the Golden Gate Bridge. So and the other part of my answer actually is, I think as a society we've lost the capacity for multi-billion-dollar projects.
Right.
Infrastructure projects. If you look at our highways, they're falling apart. If you look at, so there's a lot we have to invest in, I think, before an underwater bridge with high currents.
Well, let's come back to that in a second. We're with Matt Stevens talking about SMART. We'll be right back. And we're back with Matt Stevens. He's the community outreach specialist with our local SMART train. We're just talking about why the train stops at Larkspur, and there's some really interesting reasons why. So we have the geology covered, the steepness of the grade, the currents, and we don't have the money anymore. Seems like, just as a society, as you're saying, those huge infrastructure projects are kind of yesteryear. We're not going to see a big dig like we did in Boston or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah.
But the other answer, though, is most people who commute today on 101 aren't going to San Francisco.
Really?
Most of the jobs in the North, most of the people who live in the North Bay and work, their jobs are in the North Bay.
Oh, interesting. I totally just misapprehended that. Okay.
There's been a shift in the last 25 years from a San Francisco-bound commute to a North Bay-bound commute. When you do your census data gathering, one of the questions that's asked is, where do you work and how do you get there? And today, most people work in the North Bay. Now, as you go further south, the number of San Francisco-bound commuters increases, especially in southern Marin.
Okay.
But people who live but people who live in Sonoma County most of the commuters in 101 tend not to go further south than San Rafael, and so you're optimized for the people who actually live here. So the SMART train really is about serving the North Bay employment market, and one of our biggest fans are the large employers. In fact, Marin, which is a large Marin County employer, just recently purchased a large complex of buildings in downtown San Rafael, walking distance from the SMART station in downtown San Rafael.
That's great.
Because of that.
So now we're also seeing positive economic impact where jobs are being developed or companies are congregating here.
One of the things I've often liked to talk, I've often thought of SMART as a local economic stimulus plan as well, because over $300 million of contracts have actually gone to local contractors. Both of our prime contractors for rebuilding the railroad and building our infrastructure are Oakland-based.
That's great.
And so that's pretty local, considering that they're specialty contractors.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah, that's great.
And they've done a great job of hiring local labor, local equipment operators. We've worked with local unions in that, or they have anyway, in that respect. And so a lot of our taxpayer dollars have come back into the local community.
So, you mentioned Oakland, and of course, BART will always come to mind. There was that recent controversy with BART where it was learned that 70% or more of their surveillance cameras for security purposes on the train were actually either not operable or were just decoys. They were fake. And I understand the whole Michel Foucault, panopticon thinking behind that, but in terms of the percentage of fake cameras we're going to have on Smart, we're
actually not going to have fake cameras.
Yeah.
We will have real cameras. And frankly, it's because it's a smaller system.
Yeah.
We don't have as many vehicles as BART does, and we're not serving as broad sort of a commute range.
Yeah.
But we recently just hired a chief of police. We do have a police department of one at this point in time.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
he's actually a real cop.
It's a she.
A she? Okay.
It's a she.
Yeah.
She's a former detective from the city of Novato.
That is awesome.
And she was hired as our security chief. And then the state assembly actually passed a law enabling us to make her a chief of police, so she can relate to other chiefs of police on a more equal basis.
That's great.
And we had a nice ceremony for her recently where we invited all the other chiefs of police just to say, here she is. She's one of you now.
That's awesome. That's really great. There's a lot of positives, obviously. Do you anticipate any negatives with the Smart Train?
Well, I don't know if I'd call this a negative.
Fair enough.
However, what we're doing is we're really reintroducing a mode of transportation and a type of equipment into the North Bay that we haven't had in the North Bay really with any meaningful levels of frequency or experience since the late 1950s. So we have over 60 at-grade railroad crossings that the train has to cross over.
So there are safety concerns, certainly, yeah.
Well, obviously safety is a big concern. We haven't had trains operating in the North Bay for almost 2 generations.
So we don't have a society that understands the relationship to trains, like don't walk in front of them. Right. Okay.
Don't race a train through a railroad crossing,
Right.
And
You're
one
not
of the things
win.
I'd love to talk a little about today is this thing, because safety is huge to me personally, as well as to the agency. So we've been actually doing an extensive rail safety outreach program since 2012.
I've seen your campaign, especially lately, and I think that's really great. You're heading it off like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we start off in schools with children and teachers and parents, and then of course drivers are another big marketplace for our safety messaging.
Is that part of your job, is to kind of understand the possibility of all of these different issues and head them all off like that?
Absolutely.
How do you sleep at night, without this neurotic thinking of...
That's why I play rock music.
That's right. Do you think housing prices are going to change with the train, because it's such an attractive thing?
I think that's kind of a red herring, so to speak.
Right.
Housing prices are going to do what housing prices do. Yeah. Now, there have been some studies that show that homes that are near transit stations, especially rail transit stations, tend to go up in value because it's convenient for people to walk to a train station.
Yeah, and in Petaluma, that's going to be phenomenal, because there's an area they call it Midtown now. It wasn't called that until recently. Realtors decided that's what it's going to be called, and it's you can see it beginning to blossom, and it's great. It's really actually improving that area.
Yeah.
But,
and I think that we haven't touched on what we call transit-oriented development, but I think in terms of environmentalism and sustainability, I think that living or working near transit is one of the key things a person can do to become more sustainable.
Yeah.
And so Smart will be an enabler of that, for sure.
Smart's also an enabler of Cloverdale, about to explode into this bustling hipster metropolis, because that's the terminus, the northbound terminus of the line. Do you anticipate, what do you anticipate happening to Cloverdale? I think it's going to just blow up and become this awesome place. Not that it isn't already, but it's beginning to get the trappings of a more metropolitan area. Pour over coffee places, wine bars everywhere.
Cloverdale is a beautiful community. It really is.
Yeah.
In fact, we were just at Cloverdale.
Buying it up.
Well, no, we were there earlier. We were there on the 29th. We did a community meeting.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to Cloverdale in the first phase.
Oh, I see. Okay.
There's a couple of, it's funding dependent. We're having to phase the program. One of the things that happened in 2008 when we passed the sales tax measure was that the economy had a pretty serious dip. And the bond market collapsed. And so the Smart Board of Directors had to rethink how to deliver the project. And a project that's this large in scale usually is accomplished in phases. So they determined that a good first phase would be from Santa Rosa to downtown San Rafael. Then we started working on getting funding for extensions, and so we were successful in obtaining funding for the Larkspur extension.
Great.
We do, even though most commuters are staying in the North Bay, we think it's important to connect to regional transportation hubs. That's why we went to the airport boulevard, so we can have an easy connection to the Santa Rosa airport.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful.
Sonoma County Airport, sorry.
No, I'm with you. Yeah, no. Charles Schultz.
That's right. And then the ferry terminal at Larkspur.
Yeah.
And now we're working hard to identify and secure funding for an extension to Windsor, and then we'll go to Healdsburg and then Cloverdale. The big hurdle between Windsor and Cloverdale is a bridge over the Russian River just south of Healdsburg. And it's probably going to need to be replaced. We're not 100% sure, but it's an old bridge. You know, all of the infrastructure that we've been rehabilitating or rebuilding was actually built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, so it's old.
Yeah.
And that's an old bridge.
It's coming together, though. When do you guys open officially?
We don't have an official start date yet.
Okay.
We'll open before the end of the year.
Great.
We're in the process of doing a series of deploying a series of testing protocols. We're in the midst of what we call systems integration testing, which means that there's a number of significant systems that have been developed independently, and now they have to come together and work well together. And so we're in the process of testing those systems in an integrated fashion. That means we're running trains more and more frequently. We're testing all the railroad crossings, testing the train's ability to communicate with the railroad crossing and vice versa, and the dispatch center. And then once we complete the systems integration testing, which should be like springish, like June-ish, we'll start what we call integrated passenger or simulated passenger service.
That's great.
And so we're running the trains as if we were carrying passengers at our proposed schedule and speeds, but without passengers, just to make sure everything works well together.
That's great.
As a whole, including our schedule.
Well, Matt, I have to say thank you. You have to come back.
Yeah.
We have many other issues to discuss. Matt Stevens, he's the community outreach specialist from Smart
I'd like
Train.
to close with one thing, if I may.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, since I have the opportunity.
Please.
I just want to encourage everybody to be safe around trains and tracks. Okay, if you're a car driver, please don't race a train across the tracks. When you see the safety gates come down, stop. Don't stop on the tracks. And if you're a pedestrian, please don't use the tracks as a path of travel. Make sure that you cross the tracks at a railroad crossing, and you can see what that is by a thing called a crossbuck. It's a railroad crossing sign that looks like this. And so I just want to encourage everybody to be safe.
You know, Matt Stevens, let's do some PSAs when it comes time to do it. That's a great idea. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll have you back. Appreciate it.
Right.
Yeah.